then your power also goes with it, so it's not authentic. If your power comes from your money, then as your money disappears, or as it becomes less important, then your power also goes away. If your power comes from your physical beauty, from your attractiveness, from your youth, from your good looks, from your athletic prowess, whatever it may be, then as that shifts, as it all does, as all form does, as all form is born in a night to perish in a night, then your power is also born in a night to perish in a night. The spiritual being knows that power is not located in those external kinds of things, in those physical things. That personal empowerment is something that comes from how I choose to process my world. It comes from knowing that no one can make a fool of me without my consent. It comes from knowing that other people's opinions and other people's points of view, while they may be negative, are not something that I have to be upset with and controlled by. That it's that inner kind of glow that comes from someone who knows that I am powerful because of my mind and my soul, and not because of anything physical. The spiritual being feels connected to all of humanity. The non-spiritual being feels separate from all others. A very simple reason for this. The spiritual being knows that the connection that he has between others is invisible. It is the connection that happens when you close your eyes and you go within, and your thoughts connect you to someone or something outside of you. So that people on the other side of the planet and people on the other side of your own particular community and your own family are connected to you through this mind, this invisible intelligence that threads its way through all of us. The non-spiritual being feels separate from all others. And this disconnection allows that person to find it easier to have enemies, for example. It finds it easier to know that if this person has a different point of view than we do, then he is on the other side. And so therefore killing people even in the name of someone assigning your enemies to you is perfectly legitimate and all right. Whereas the spiritual being knows that we're all connected and that our differences are just differences in perception, but that we're all cells in this body called humanity. When you feel connected to other people, you have a tendency to see that fullness of God in all that you run into. And when you feel separate from the rest of us, from the rest of humanity, it is easier for you to have a philosophy of you got to get them before they get you. It's a tough world out there. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and there's a lot of competition. And you have to prove yourself to other people, and you have to be able to manipulate and control them. But when you feel that you're connected, then you feel that you're in a partnership with other people rather than in competition with them. The fifth of these is that the spiritual being knows a dimension beyond cause and effect, whereas the non-spiritual being, the five-sensory being, believes in cause and effect. Cause and effect is that those laws of motion, that Newtonian physics, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, and that when you plant a seed, that from that seed things will grow. And you hear these kind of quotations all the time. And certainly there is, in the physical world, there is a very strong cause and effect premise that is operating. And most of us know that and believe in it and know that if we behave in a certain way, these are going to be the consequences of our behavior. And you'll hear this kind of talk all the time. When the spiritual being goes beyond the physical, and that's really the difference. It doesn't reject the physical, recognizes that in the physical world there is a property called for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, and that these laws of physics are operating. But in the spiritual world, particularly when you begin to study it at the quantum level, you discover that there is no time and that beginnings and ends are only things that we process the world that way because we begin and we end. And we find it difficult to even be able to think of things outside of ourselves as not being subject to these laws of cause and effect. The sixth of these is that the spiritual being is motivated by ethics, by serenity, by quality in their life. And that's very different than the non-spiritual being, who seems to be motivated by achievement and by performance and by acquisitions. And this is an interesting distinction. The five-sensory being finds themselves with a lot of goals to get to certain places in their life, to perform at a certain level in their life, to acquire so much. These are the kinds of measures of success that you'll find talked about a lot in our culture, in the West particularly. And people spend a lot of their time going after that, trying to achieve a lot, trying to perform at a certain level, see how much I can accumulate in my life, and then use these merit badges and these accumulations as means to assess if they're on purpose in their life. The spiritual being is motivated instead of by achievement, by ethics, by quality, by serenity in their life. And while they're high achievers, and they perform very often at higher levels than anyone else around them, and they often acquire a great deal. I mean, it isn't as if they're people who don't get things and can't do things and don't get places in their life, but that isn't the motivating drive in their life. They're really driven by the desire to serve, by the desire to give away, by the desire to make a difference. A magnificent man who was an example of this, who just died recently, was Sam Walton, who was the founder of Walmart, who started with one store, but whose whole philosophy was based upon how can you best serve people? How can you serve them? And while a lot of things came into his life and he became a billionaire in his lifetime, his whole life was about giving, was about serving, was about providing for other people, setting up cancer institutes and setting up all kinds of philanthropic organizations to help other people and so on. He always kept service at the core of his being. And so I am not suggesting that all people who acquire or who perform or who are achieved are in some way non-spiritual beings. I'm just saying the motivation, what the drive is to move forward in their life, is motivated by the need for the spiritual being. It's what Maslow called growth motivation. To grow, to get someplace else, to get to a higher place, to be able to serve and do God's work, if you will, which isn't necessarily religious work. It is spiritual work, versus what Maslow called deficiency motivation, which is that I have to look at the things in my life that I don't have, and I have to repair those deficiencies. I have to plug those holes in. If I don't have enough money in the bank, then that's going to drive me to do it. If I can only run a mile in 6 minutes, then I'm deficient because I want to be able to run one in 5 minutes. So I'm motivated by my need to constantly repair my deficiencies. The spiritual being knows that they're already complete, they're already whole, that they're already total, but they can grow. And there's a big, significant difference there. The seventh of the spiritual dozen is that the spiritual being practices meditation, and the non-spiritual being rejects meditation by and large. They think that the time for those kinds of things is on Sunday mornings or Saturday afternoons when you go to the synagogue or when you go to church, but they don't really have time to sit quietly and contemplate, and they see that as perhaps what weird New Agers maybe do, or it's just not a practical kind of thing to do. The spiritual being knows that the way to access the higher part of their consciousness, to reach that unified field, to get to that place where we are all connected, to access that divine guidance that is there, that going within and meditating, whatever practice that you use, is not only a valuable thing, but it's absolutely necessary. As Blaise Pascal, the great French philosopher and scientist, primarily scientist, said, all of man's troubles stem from his inability to sit quietly in a room alone. All of man's troubles. That people who take the time to go within and make that a part of their regular daily routine don't seem to be troubled. They seem to age less. They seem to have less stress. They seem to be more calm in their life. And I can't tell you how many business people I meet who have their own little ritual that they don't even like to talk about because they might be perceived as being too weird. But a very good friend of mine who's a very, very prominent attorney in South Florida, I asked him one time, I said, do you meditate, David? And he said, no, he said, I never really had time for the meditation and all that. He said, but I do take about 15 or 20 minutes a couple times a day, and I go into my mind and I solve most of the cases that I'm working on in that way, in that real quiet space. He said, but I've never had any training.